Snan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine today. How
Nice.
about you?
I'm doing great. It feels amazing to come back and walk on campus and see everyone again. It's amazing that Mateo just ran into him right before we got started. But yeah, it's an amazing school. I've really enjoyed the time I've spent here, and now that my sister's graduating in 2 days, it's really coming full circle. But yeah, I think it's incredible the work you've done to build this. And when I look at your life, I'm really excited to have you on this podcast in particular because I think you exemplify a lot of the themes we've got into a lot in the last 40 episodes of trying to find your passion in life, living a meaningful life and fulfilling life, in addition to going out and trying to achieve a lot in the world. Because I think a lot of people get stuck in that race to achieve as much as possible and sacrifice some of their joy and love, but then other people are able to do both simultaneously. So I'm really excited to learn from your perspectives and hear your stories today.
Thank you. And you succinctly put it. For me, I needed life on my terms, and I wanted to make sure that whatever I chose to do, all the people that were in my life were never compromised. And I don't mean to be sexist or gender-based, but I definitely think it is very difficult for a woman to balance her career and being a mother and, keeping her family together. And I feel like for me that was so important. And so I didn't mind if my career didn't take off as fast as it should have, or if I had breaks, because I felt life is it's a long journey, right? And we don't have to accomplish everything within those 10 years. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think that if I look back at my time at Penny, one of the themes that keep coming back and forth is this wrestle between my desire to do as much as possible versus actually taking the time to get good at something. Because there's periods of time where I try to do so much as possible, and I feel like I spread myself so thin. But then it becomes challenging to actually get good at something, which is where I found just like laser focusing on some things in life has helped me a little bit. So when you talk about your life and how you've managed to have a great family but also find so much success in your career, how do you think you struck that balance, and where did you find that?
So I think it evolves. So when I'm listening to you talk about Penny, to me, unless you spread yourself thin, you would have not known what it is to be focused. So it's like we can't escape certain realities of life. And similarly for me, I went to an extremely hyper-focused school. I lived in an ecosystem which was all about achievement in a very short-term basis, and you'll understand that too. Meaning that growing up in India and being in a similar situation where we are in a competitive environment, everybody around you has things that they say, their benchmarks can stress you. Because you're just listening, you're observing, and then you want to be validated. So to me, if I reflect back on my time when you were in Pedi, or my time at the same juncture, it was the most confusing time of my life. I knew what I was good at, but I wasn't willing to do what everybody was doing, or to either go to med school or engineering, because I was also very artistic. And I had to always second guess myself in terms of, is that what I really want to do? But then what if I'm not validated? So it's a real tussle. And I feel like the journey goes, and at some point you gain that conviction. And for me, I think I was at a very good place with my career in textiles, but becoming a mother suddenly made me feel like it would hurt me more if my son found me to be a stranger than all the glory I got at work. And then I think I started reflecting on what is important for me and what are the terms I want to live by. But it's a journey. I don't think I would have arrived at it any sooner.
Yeah, I want to learn more about that moment you transitioned from working so heavily in textiles to prioritizing your family, because I think that when a lot of people realize they're in that zone where maybe they're not living in terms of what they deeply want, and they want to change some aspect of their life, it takes a lot of agency and action to be able to make such a big change and reprioritize. And I think that a lot of people, when they see that discomfort of change, they just go back to their old ways, and then they stay in the same condition for a long period of time, and what I kind of call like the complacent condition, where you kind of just accept it, even though you know deeply in your heart there's something else you want. So were we able to find that ability to overcome that discomfort and reprioritize what's important to you, especially because it can be so scary at that time?
It is. So I can say it's the village you live in. I will say I have an extremely supportive husband, and he always saw more in me than I saw in myself. So I will tell you, when you work in the corporate world, right, you have a lot of aspirations, and in the corporate world it's all about conforming. And that is, I think, every person's biggest dilemma in life. They believe that they can do so much more, but when a corporation's goals are to make safe bets, to make safe projections, they're not ready to risk what your idea may be. Because they're, again, they have shareholders to respond to. And for me, I think that was my first thing. I'm so grateful that I worked for the largest textile company in the world at that time. And my God, my hands would itch because I would watch my boss's boss make such conservative decisions. For example, in the 1990s, I will say I should go back to the fact that at a very young age, at 20, I got the opportunity to be a management trainee. And when I did that, India was at the cusp. It was just getting into the whole export world. So life is all about sometimes choices being presented to you. So I got chosen to be one of the management trainees, and I was sent to take, at a young age, at 2021, to be responsible for garment production in the south of India for menswear, working with mills, working with handloom weavers. So at a very young age, when you get responsibility like that, you get to taste responsibility. And so in those days, you had a quota of how many garments could get out of the country before December. So at that time, you feel the heat of it. So you become very organized, etc. And I think that freedom of learning how to make a decision and it working, once you taste it, it's very different. It's very difficult to conform. So fast forward, I come and start working in the US. And here it's all about, conservative estimates. And I'm like, oh my God, I was so used to making these decisions. So I think that is your first restless feeling. And then subsequently, like I said, becoming a mom, again, I had to sit back and think, do I want to be frustrated with life every time that I know that the decisions should be A, but everybody is going towards B? And in a B2B situation, right, you are not really dealing with the consumer. So you may have a great idea, but the consumer is never going to see it because you're the manufacturer who has to sell it to the retailer, and the retailer needs to, if the retailer understood your vision, then they bought into your story. So I would say this happened between when I was 26 and 32, to see all life play like this. And that gave me a lot of conviction to say, no, I feel very strongly about it because I had worked in another country, so I had a bigger global perspective. And I felt people that I reported to at that time only knew a very narrow perspective. And so there I could see the conflict. And I think that slowly helped me eventually to say, I want to be in a business, and I want to do a business that's directly connected to the consumer. Because then I'll know if I'm on the wrong, I can correct it. But at least it's a dynamic environment. So my long answer to this is, it's a process. And we would love to read a lot of books to think, now we'll have the secret sauce. However, you need to feel that angst in your stomach. You need to get angry. You need to get restless in order to do right by you.
Makes sense, yeah. When I hear your story, one thing in particular jumps out is that you seem to have a skill of being able to individually think, which I think I respect people that do have that skill, because I think conforming is so hardwired into who we are as people. Just because if it goes back to how you evolved as humans as well. If you were in a tribe 100,000 years ago and you believe something different than the tribe, the whole tribe's going to leave you behind, you're going to die. Which is why over time, when I look at people around me and people, how they act, they naturally conform because that's their go-to. They just jump to that. But I think being able to individually think is such a rare skill in the world that we live in today, especially when, even with media, there's so much noise coming in telling you that this is the way you live and this is the way you live, and it's reinforced and reinforced and reinforced from when you're born. Which is why, how do you think someone can develop the ability to think for themselves and make a decision and avoid conforming?
Shaurya, it's so good that at this young age you figured this out. So for me, it was very interesting. I didn't understand why I was the way I was. And to a large extent, I always wanted everything to make sense, which for my father was quite difficult because there he had it all planned that I would be a doctor, and I'm questioning. I'm looking at my extended family and I'm looking at the doctors and saying, they don't look happy. I want to be happy. So deep inside, I knew one thing. My bottom line was I wanted to be happy. I didn't want to be a whining person who always complains. So I understood very young that then I had to make choices. But I want to segue into a very interesting point that you mentioned about tribes. So while doing my PhD, we were studying this whole aspect of many ways of knowing and many ways of learning. And you know what? What was fascinating, all the literature and the research showed that the Eastern philosophy, which is where we all come from, is all about conformity. It's all about the elder making the decisions. So for example, a teacher is God. Never question them. So they look at children and students from the East. They say they never question anything because they were told that the gospel is the textbook. The teacher is actually disseminating the gospel. So for them to become individualized in their thinking, it takes many years. It takes a lot of, so the person goes through a lot of transformation. Initially, they feel guilty about questioning the elder. Then when, sometimes they make a decision based on it, and if it's successful, that gives them confidence. But if it failed, then they go back to, I should have just listened to this person. Whereas the West was always about being the renegade, about questioning authority. So it's very interesting. We are a product of nature and nurture and culture.
Yeah, I feel like that energy of questioning everything is so baked into who I am, probably because of the environment I've grown in, right? Whether it's from the school system or, I went to a school that you designed, so obviously that's baked into a lot of it as well. The nature of questioning, I think Patty helped me enhance that as well. And when I talk to my parents as well and compare them to our method of thought and how you, versus questioning versus conformity, I see that difference as well over there. So in that case, if you grew up in that environment, how long did it take you to come out of that? When did you have this kind of realization that you saw them as being doctors and you didn't want to go down that path? Was that early on, or when did it start to develop?
Yeah. So I think I can answer that truthfully by saying I knew that what I didn't want to be. I didn't know why I felt so strongly about that. It's now that I'm reflecting and saying that I wanted to live on my terms. And I wanted to have a life where I was supported by somebody that thought like me. So I will say that, so I met my husband at a very young age, right? So I can say that he is all about individual thought. So while I may have been that way, I didn't have the courage, because when you grow up as a woman, as a young girl in India, it's all about, conforming. But deep inside, I had a lot of individualism in me. But my individualism was limited to what I could do that didn't disrupt anybody's feathers. But then subsequently, marrying a person who's so individualistic, he would question, now why would you do this? Because they said so, if you feel some way. And I would say, because it has to be done. He was like, no. And I think That's where I think your peer influence is important. The people you are surround yourself with is important. You need people who can positively reinforce you rather than make you feel inadequate. So I will say that my evolution started as young as, like, I'll say 25, where I could actually make positive decisions for myself, where I could hold saying, no, I want my life to be this way. And it's okay if you're all not happy about it. So I will say from 16 to 25, I was evolving, but not with much courage. And and then meeting the right people reinforced that there was nothing wrong with the way I thought, or there was nothing wrong with wanting more from life. Otherwise, they make you feel guilty that you want so much from life. So I can say, but again, it's still an evolution. I am who I am today based on that evolution, but I did not have this kind of conviction, I'll say then. So it slowly progresses and we stop being so judgmental about ourselves. And I think that's very important. Don't judge yourself by any mistakes. Look at whatever we did as an oops moment, because that's more gentle. And then you say, okay, now I guess I'll do it another way. And I think that's a very affirming sense of dealing with situations and decisions, rather than beating yourself, oh, why did I do that? I should have just listened. And these are all cultural predispositions that we slowly are outgrowing.
Interesting. So walk me through your early life. So talk to me about where you were born, where in India you were born, okay, and the initial schools you went to at the middle school and high school.
Surely. So I was born, so my father's with the defense accounts. So that meant being in another place every 3 years.
So is that like military?
Military. So military.
I think my dad's probably Air Force as well.
Yeah.
I mean, my dad's grandfather.
Yeah.
My dad's father.
Your dad's dad, actually. Yeah. So my father was with the defense accounts, which meant he was responsible for the fiscal viability of all the three forces. So I was born in Kolkata, and then after that my parents moved to Patna and Siliguri, and then moved to Guwahati. I was 5 in Guwahati, and at that time my dad was attached to the army. And in fact, in Guwahati, that's where I attended my first, my primary school. And it was an American school. How coincidental is that? And I never forget, I think I cried every day because it was very formal. The teachers didn't smile. It was very formidable. So all I remember is crying, and my poor brother, who's 8 years older to me, having to sometimes not go to his school to just sit with me because I would be wailing all day. Subsequently, my father, so I'm a late child. My father had me when he was 44. So by the time I was 5 or 6, my father asked that he be posted to the south of India, because I am ethnically from the south and my grandparents have agricultural holdings, and my father is one of the older sons, so he felt my grandmother could benefit with him being in the southern states. So we moved to Tamil Nadu, to a town called Coimbatore, and we lived in the defense camp. Let me tell you, life is amazing in Indian defense camps because it's a gated community. You have clay courts, you have billiards, like it's a lifestyle. So I had a very rich life from age 5 all the way to age 12. This is where we were there. And then again, defense in India is extremely Western, meaning you have the ball, you have the dancing. So here I'm getting older and my dad is like, I don't think I want my daughter to be here, because then he'll have to worry about the way the Eastern philosophy is. They worry about this whole concept of boys and girls. And, we are in a very, very permissive society. So my dad said that, okay, I don't mind moving, and we'll move to Bangalore. And in Bangalore, he opted not to live in the defense camp, but live as a civilian outside. And that was his primary reason. And my grade 7 through college was in Bangalore. And I will say those were so while my primary education was rich, I enjoyed life. I mean, I did very well there too. I think your growth takes place in middle school, slowly. And so I had an amazing school that I went to. It's still considered the top 4 in the country. And we went to the defense schools, like your father and I went to Kendriya Vidyalaya, central schools. So these are schools that are run by the central government, and they are very stringent, and they have really qualified teachers. And where I went to school, it was in the backyard of Indian Institute of Science, which would be like NIH. The advantages of that are they vest themselves with the school. A lot of the scientists have their kids in the school. So I realized that when you are surrounded by knowledge, you just become curious. So I had great teachers who fostered my public speaking, my debate. I was good in track and field. So when I look back, I feel like I was fortunate that I always had great mentors, people who saw potential in me. And I was a happy-go-lucky person who would be like, if given a choice, I would just exist. But I think my peers saw potential in me. So while I was in middle school, I would get elected to be a house leader, superseding my high schoolers.
What do you think they saw in you in particular?
I don't know. I wish I knew that, because in my mind, I was, quite chill and not wanting to do anything. But then once I got responsibility, I took it very seriously. And so I would even do things like not show up during election day thinking, if they don't see me, I won't get elected. And the teachers would be waiting for me saying, good try, you still got elected. So I guess I was a popular leader. And every teacher of mine fostered my learning. And after that, so I will say I went to this school until 10th. But in those days, the way India was set up, you had a choice. You either continued in the school for 11th and 12th, or you went to a junior college for 11th and 12th. And if you wanted to go to a professional, if you were in a pre-professional track, the NCERT or CBSE curriculum was considered much harder, and the local curriculum was considered much easier. So if you got into the top 4 schools there, you jumped and you went there. Unfortunately, I was one of those who jumped. But ironically, the school I went to had the brightest of the bright, but the culture of the junior college was very male-centric. And I found it toxic, because for someone who I was a very happy-go-lucky person who loved learning. But I didn't like people comparing and contrasting. And in this environment, that's all that happened. And I felt it was just not conducive for me. So the teaching was purely towards test taking. It was not towards the teaching you to enjoy what you learned. So I did physics, chemistry, math, biology. And I felt those 2 years were my worst years. I mean, I did very well in the college culturally. I was still in the drama club. I did all that. But if I look at personal development, I felt that was a setback. So then, my father was all intent that I would go to med school or I would do mechanical engineering. And I was like, I don't see myself there. And so I remember I had a large group of friends. So we were standing in a bus stop. And we were all figuring out, okay, what do we do? I don't want to do chemistry, botany, zoology. Because mind you, 38 years back, it wasn't as exciting as it is today. And I was like, how will that job convert if I do that? Standing in the bus stop, we meet one of my seniors from school. And she said, hey, I go to this college and they have this integrated sciences. It's like the United States. Every year it's 3 different courses. So it was like microbiology, environmental sciences, physiology, then the next year, textiles, microbiology. I mean, there were all these different majors. And I was like, actually, that suits me, because by then I'll figure out what I want to do in life. Now, I had done very well, right, in 12th. So I knew I would get admission into this. So I go quietly, get admission, and then come home and tell my parents. Oh, my father was livid because it was not going as he planned. But then I had an innate courage deep inside that he could look at my face. I would be smiling and say, but I'm doing it, Daddy, So he had to just live with it.
Do you think, he knew it was just coming, or was it kind of...
No, I don't think. I think he was upset because he didn't think. Again, as parents too, we don't know how our children evolve. I don't think he even thought I would have the courage to go quietly get admission and come home. So they are also learning about their children, So my dad was learning about me. And then I went to an all-girls college. Can I tell you, that was the best experience. We were, I think, 30 of us. Everybody had taken this major because they didn't want to do something else. They were bright, and we all loved each other and embraced each other's talents. We weren't threatened. And to me, that's very important, to have a peer group that goes rah-rah. And I think that was the best thing. So when I said to you prior, to this, about how I got to this job, as a management trainee, one of my classmates saw the job and she said, listen, why don't we both apply to it and then we'll go and live in Delhi together. So we both applied, and she had, in the meantime, applied towards a journalism master's program. So she got that and then she left, and I was like, great. And then I landed up with a job and I moved on. So I would say my trajectory improved with courage from making that big rebellious decision, finding peers who, when we talk, we reinforce each other, saying, okay, we're not crazy. There is logic to our decisions. And I think that's where I'm going. So that's how the journey starts, surrounding yourself and making conscious decisions with friends, conscious decisions with who you listen to and who you won't, and starting to recognize that there are some people who just conform and don't do anything because they want validation, and that there are some others who truly understand they're doing nothing wrong. The only thing that they're doing is exercising their right to live. And that's an evolution.
Yeah. I find it interesting how I think people have different types of intelligence. And some people might enjoy following systems and winning games in that type of way. And some people have, like as you do, more of an artistic nature to yourself, where you want to create systems and you want to build it yourself in a way. And I think that I've talked to a lot of people that have that rebellious nature as well. And one of the examples that comes to mind is my math teacher. He was also in a way, when he was growing up, he also had that rebellious nature to himself, where he didn't want to go and do what his parents were telling him. He wanted to go his own path. And I think there are those category of people that I find quite interesting. And I also want to go back to before you were talking about how you don't always have a set path in your life. I think we were talking about this before the podcast had begun, that a lot of life is about embracing the variability of it and taking it one step at a time, and not having every step of the way planned out, and like the safe option that I think
Correct.
is so promoted in definitely I think America and some of the Western countries today with the whole college system as well. So talk to me more about that, about the...
So I think considering I came here in my 20s, I will say that if you are in a culture where everybody conforms,
Sorry.
doing your own thing, are you okay?
My hamstring is starting to...
Oh no.
I think it started cramping a little bit. I'm sorry.
Not at all. So I am saying that when you grow up in a culture where everybody is conforming, stand up and go. I know it happens to me too.
I don't know what happened. Oh, my quad too.
Is it going?
Oh, fuck. All right.
So we were talking about evolution, right? We were talking about the courage to do things. Then where did we go?
I can't remember. Oh yeah, so I asked you the question about the topic we were talking about before we started the podcast, about how a lot of people try to follow the safe path in life versus the embracing the variability.
Yeah, no, I think, and we talked about, like I said, it's all about who you are with.
Oh yes.
And the environment, because I can clearly see that even you or me, if we live in an environment, so there's some innate qualities, like you were saying that there are some people who can be individualistic. So when you're in an environment where everybody conforms, I think many of us who have individual ideas feel suppressed, because we need to toe the line, right? We need to conform, so we may not be this vocal. And in some ways, coming to a country like this, where it's all about individualism, is like liberation. You are allowed to, and also here, rightfully so, we embrace failures as learning moments. We don't look at it as a personal affliction. So I think all that contributes to it. And so in many ways, we have to be lucky that we are in such environments too. Or we should create the luck for ourselves.
I've noticed that in recent years, I've definitely gotten better at individual thinking. I mean, I don't think I'm at the perfect state yet. And
Oh my
I
gosh,
say that
Shurya, you're
because
so young still.
I say that because sometimes I realize that when I individually think, sometimes it feels really, really good because you feel like you're the only one who's right. And then you feel that liberation kind of thing that I know so many people don't know. But then a lot of times I found in the past, I've gotten to really, really question myself and think that, am I even living correctly? Like all these individual
And can I
unique
tell
beliefs
you
I
that
have.
is normal? Every one of us. So people can, I think it is normal and acceptable to feel really good some days because things are going well and get down in the dumps on another day. We all go through that because life is unpredictable. So there is no crystal ball that tells you, continue, you're on the right track. So we're always second guessing ourselves. So I find I go through the same thing. There are days when everything is crystal clear to me and what I'm doing is right. The next day I'm thinking, what if I was on a tangent? So that's very normal, and I find everyone goes through that. But I will tell you something that I want to share with you, which my father told me. And so as my father mellowed down with age and he started vicariously enjoying whatever I'm doing, I would engage in a lot of conversation with him. As a child, I spent a lot of time with him. I was a typical daddy's girl. But what my father encouraged was a lot of conversation.
Sorry, there's a camera.
Okay, yeah.
Tilted.
Let me just take this
Yeah.
call also. I know what I was saying before you got your cramp. I was saying how my father, as he got older, got very mellow in life.
Yeah.
And even when I was young, he would teach me about the stock market. Imagine a 13-year-old. I would be like, what are you talking? But I felt as I grew older, all those conversations helped me become very fiscally smart. I never was one that spent money, extravagantly or frivolously. So conversations help, like what you're doing now, right? With anybody. We learn from each other because it gives you some insights. So when he got much older, I remember when I worked in the textile world, like you asked me, I was like, I need to spend more time with Roshan. And he was very young at that time. And so I would call my dad and say, Daddy, I think I'm going to teach in FIT. But they were paying so
What's
low.
FIT?
A Fashion Institute of Technology in New York. It's like the place to be. So I knew I would get the job, but then because I had a master's, but I just felt their pay scales were really bad, and I was like, but I don't want to, So then my dad in India, this is a funny story. They love astrology. I don't know if you've come across that. They go see a palmist.
Yeah.
They go see the astrology. So my dad says, interesting. I said, what's interesting? He said, I met this astrologer who said you have a huge line in education. I said, really? And at that time, we were looking at possibly buying a daycare. But then the daycare people there said, you are so educated and you have clear insights about how you want your school. Don't get into a franchise because it's very limiting. So again, people come in your life that give you the right advice. And then subsequently, talking to my dad, he would say, think of, listen to this old man. He said, intuition is underrated, but intuition is everything. So he told me, always, if you feel like doing something, act on it and proceed on it. And I can tell you, I quote my dad to everybody saying, that was a very important piece of advice for me, because I gave up a very nice, cushy job to start a school. We took a home equity loan. I mean, we were leveraging ourselves. But if I didn't get that kind of reinforcement, I may not have had that courage. Because then you get that conviction. No, I'm going to. And also learning the tools. So I did my master's in product development and management and business development. So you learn how to take your emotions away and analyze it for what it is. So I will say skill development is very important, and the intuition. I think together it becomes passion.
Wow, that's incredible. I want to get into the next story of you building CHP as well. But first I want to ask you, when you feel like you developed the skill of staying away from emotions and just analyzing the situation, how do you do that?
Oh my God, it's so hard. So I'll tell you. So when I designed textiles, and again, I have to segue back, and I'm sorry that I go back and forth.
Okay.
Because when you ask me about evolution, I will say this. When you design a home furnishing line for the United States, can you imagine, straight out of my master's, Burlington Industries made me a window stylist. So I had to design fabrics and finishes for the retail line. There is no training. I go into my nice office on it was 1295 Avenue of Americas, and there are 3 fabric pieces there. They said, these are the conditions, this is the list of the mills, these are the finishes. In 4 weeks, we'd like to have a meeting to see what you're going to produce. And here I am saying, I thought someone would train me. But I tell you, that was a great experience, because the boss walks out and you're sitting alone in your office and you're like, oh my God, I have to figure this myself. So every experience of being thrown to the wolves helps you gain conviction of daring to do something. So I think doing all that, working in the textile industry, having a home furnishing line, and then retailers coming and saying, oh my God, this line stinks. The first time you're a designer, you think you are it. So you're so thrilled with your whole collection and you're talking about it, and then you hear people say, oh my God, those colors are awful. Oh my God, this finish is so bad. That's when the emotions get its beating. So then I learned right then that I am not designing for me, or it's not about me. It's about what I do for the consumer. So I think that was the best lesson I learned. So there I realized then I need to understand the market first. So that was a great segue and transferable skill to start a school, because you become more consumer centric.
I see. So you mentioned that when you were talking to the old man who suggested you don't get into franchise when you're going to build your school. When you think about the uniqueness of your kind of school and how you want to craft and design your own school, in the early days, what was the main purpose or driving force behind this is what I want to see my school like?
Very good question. So I will say that when I did my undergrad with all these 3 different courses, one was child development. And the way in India, I feel that my education there in child development, even though it was 1 year because out of the 3 years, it was far deeper and rigorous than what I see a lot of the teacher training here. So for example, I did early childhood, and in the college we have a lab school. So when you're learning about the theory of child development and how children develop, you also are asked to make little lesson plans, and you are graded based on how excited the kids look. So there were days when we saw some of those bright-eyed, bushy-tailed kids didn't come, we would be like, can you test us another day? But you learned very early, and then at the end of the year, each of us were assigned a student that we had to do a full case study correlating, like you went to their house to see how their home environment was. You interview the parents extensively to understand parenting styles, and then you correlate it to your observations in
where the study was being done? Was this?
This was while I was in college.
Okay.
So each of us in college had a case study, a full 3-month. Yeah, this was in India. So it's a very deep way of understanding child development. So each of us at the end of the year would make presentations about our case study. So I had one boy, someone else had another girl. And as we discussed our case study, which was just like a typical scientific research paper, you give an introduction, you give a family background, then you go into parenting styles, education, and then you correlate the behavior, etc. based on all that. But that 30 of us discussing 30 case studies, I felt it was the best experience. So when I came here and I started seeing daycares and schooling, I was like, but I have been with children. This is not how it's to be done. And while I was at college, I used to tutor children from K through 8. That was my pocket money. So that helped too. So I had spent so much time with my consumer, the children. I realized later when I was looking at schools that I actually had a much better sense of how children learn than maybe the American consumer in terms of textiles. So prior knowledge is very important. So what I did is I took 2 years while I was working in the textile industry. By then I was very well known. I could design in my sleep. I would come back home and read to understand the American educational system. So I did, so that took 2 years, and then look at the market. At that time, I was only looking at early childhood, and I was looking at cognitive development. So then I studied all the franchises. I studied everybody's model, and then I used to read voraciously. I came up with our educational model. And sadly, it's not here, but I think it's in my office. Mm-hmm. There's a painting that I drew of how the school should be.
That was we can also show it on the video.
Yeah. So it's upstairs, So that's the visual. That's how we marketed the school. And I think what helped was within 3 months, people loved the model. People saw that it was so child-centric and it was very scientifically based. I had no plans to grow it like the way it was. But people loved it and they said, you need to add. And to be honest, in reflection, because I used to tutor children all the time, I am most comfortable in the grade 1 through grade 8 space. So when parents were asking me to add on, I was like, oh my God, this is super. And American systems are so structured. So even for a business, everything is so transparent. You can go to the township. They will tell you where to find the land. You can go to the Small Business Development Corporation and it's seamless. It tells you step by step how to incorporate and set up your business. So I thrived on things like that. So, and I had the guts because I felt it was so much more organized. And then putting curriculums together was something I loved doing. So it all fell in place, is how I would say it.
Nice. Can you talk me through the educational model, like in particular?
Sure.
What are the patterns you've noticed in terms of the most effective way to, educate children for them to be successful?
So Shaurya, I will say I had to compare and contrast in order to come up with the best model. So when I compared my education, I will definitely say that what I enjoyed in my education, like I said to you before, was having mentors, having teachers who saw potential in me and harnessed me. And that stuck with me. So I believed as long as children have mentors who believe that they can be anything, then they can do anything. So if you look even from what I wrote about, about my first, like Oak Crest Academy or Cedar Hill, it's all about children have immense potential. We need to provide a nurturing environment. I don't believe in this IQ because that's all false. And so that helped me understand how I wanted the school to be. Then I already had a child in the school system. My son was already in an independent school. So I would compare how he was learning. I learned a lot because while we grew up, we did not have phonics and all those pre-reading skills. So that was something that I loved that this system had. So I embraced that. But on the other hand, what I didn't see in this system was practice. This system in this country truly believes in coaching for sports. They believe in practice for sports. But for academics, they didn't understand the value of it. They believed just learn something, and to some extent I can understand that because America is a country that has a very low cost of living. So you don't have to have a college degree. So I guess education was all about, okay, we need people to work in the industries, etc. So it was towards that end. Whereas I came from a country where education was survival. You needed to have your A game in order to survive in the country. So someone like that comes here, you think, oh my God, this is not raising the bar. So as I saw Roshan going through stuff, I was like, no, but this can be done this way. And so that helped me finalize our model here. And as you all embraced it and did well with it, it reinforced that I had the pulse of what children needed. And that's what happened.
Amazing. So there's really two parts of it. First, in the idea that children have potential, they just need the correct environment and
Correct.
to provide them with the self-image they need in order to be
Correct.
successful. And second was a practice piece. I find that first piece really interesting because I think in recent months I've been thinking a lot about the concept of self-image and how much it plays into
Self-identity, right?
self-image and identity and how much it plays into your success in life. And I see that in patterns in my time through middle school and high school as well. And even when I read about the science behind it, I find it really interesting how I think a lot of this world comes down to your perspective of it and your perception of it. And the things that people tell you when you're growing up, they kind of sit in the back of your head and become your false reality of the world.
So let's look at you. So I'll tell you, for example, if you look at CHP, we do not cut anyone from anything. We force you to participate in everything because you brought up self-identity. Self-identity and self-image only develops when you're reinforced with success. So if you're never given an opportunity to participate in any activity, how do you know whether you're good or not? And if you don't know whether you're good or not, you're very ambivalent about your own persona. Who's building your persona? So I remember when I started, like we would have things, students would tell me I don't want to take part in it. I'd be like, who asked? You're going to do it. When they finished, they were like, oh my God, it was fun. Think of you at debate. You were so introverted in 5th, but look at you now. So the point is, every educational platform should be one which gives everybody opportunities. Some may grab it right away, some may take a little longer, but who's counting and why should we? Success can happen at any age, but we need the older people or like mentors to be conscious of the fact that positive experiences and positive opportunities build self-identity.
And I think it's really important how you mentioned that you need someone there to force that on you, whether it's a parent or a mentor or someone in your life you care about, because I think when the child, they don't want to do it in the first place, but you're forced to do it, and then you get a little bit of positive reinforcement when you feel like, oh wait, I can actually do something, I can achieve something. I think that exponentiates in terms of like, you know in the back of your mind that you've achieved things in the past, and you're more confident to take more risk in the future, to think that if I could achieve that, I could probably achieve more.
100%. And that's how passion sets in. So you need to validate people such that you're constantly building their self-identity, their self-image. Because look at who is your worst enemy, yourself. You are filled with self-doubt. You look at the mirror, you will only see your flaws. Whereas actions, when you do certain things that actually allow you to benchmark yourself and see, oh my God, I did well. And so they're coming back to the educational paradigm. I remember hiring these teachers who didn't believe in tests or assessments. And I said, what kind of a system is that? So I believed in it because to me, that's validation. You need to know where you stand. And we live in a very large world. And you need to know where you are in that. So there was a lot that I was doing which was against the grain. But the reason I had conviction is because I came from a system, I shouldn't say that, I thrived from that system where I went through these processes. And so memory building, doing cumulative exams, no other school does that. But I can tell you, you all remember a lot of the things because we keep bringing it back to you in different ways. Interactive pedagogy, teaching debate allowed me to do my PhD. And because I realized while all of you did quite well in your regular classes, I would always have so much more corrections in your debate. And then I would think, how come they don't see what I am seeing? And it's because in our case, we are interacting and it's all about conveying, right? messages. Again, heard?
No.
Oh, okay.
It's a little bit, I think it's fine though.
Yeah. So conveying messages, right? So if you're not able to convey a message to me in a manner that I understand you, then what is learning? And in fact, that's what my entire doctoral work was, and it owes itself to this debate, because I said children only understand if they can engage with that matter in discussion with others. Because somebody else will give you a counter viewpoint, and then you'll think, saying, I was thinking about it this way. So you need to constantly play with the matter in order to build thought.
And it also connects back to just teaching children even values or methods of life as well. And I think a lot of, whether parents or just people in general, might have a big question that how do you actually communicate what they see in their child that they want to improve on to the child without them rebelling against that or helping them improve that. So how do you think you're able to, like, what is the key you learned in order to communicate that message down?
So I will say, as a parent and as a teacher, what I have realized is one has to be very conscious if we are trying to project ourselves through the child or we are letting the child be. For many parents, they're vicariously living through the child, hoping that their frustrations, like if they have roadblocks in their career or roadblocks in their perception of who they could be, they want it all through the child. That's when the biggest friction arrives. Because a child is this child. It's like, oh, hello. What are all these conflicting thoughts? So a lot of conversations that can be hurtful, judgmental come because each one is dealing with their own paradigm, but they're not necessarily having a subset of it. As a parent, I realized very early that what you have to look at a child's eyes to see stress. Their mouth may not say it, but their eyes speak volumes. And, I think children are very observant, and we adults need to be more observing. When we observe, we can take in their cues.
Do you think that we become less observing over time just because...
100%.
I think one of the reasons why that might be true is because I think the conforming nature you mentioned happens more and more as you get older, because you have so many experiences that you kind of understand the way the world works in this certain type of way, this certain type of perspective, and then recency bias kicks in and you're just always trying to justify your own worldview. So you think, I know that individual thinking is like we develop it through going out and trying to do more with our life and trying to engage in certain activities can help us to see that new perspective, and then putting ourselves in those environments that help us to escape that. So have you seen that in yourself, that over time it's become more difficult at all, or you've been able to
No, like I find, so very interesting. It all depends. So I'm very comfortable in my space with schools. And I know what I don't like. Like I cannot see myself in industries where it's all a debate. Because I think the creative side of me cannot thrive on so much argument. So I love this space, and I love children because children are the most non-judgmental and they are game for anything. So I have found that it matches my personality. The other aspect is, like, over the last couple of months, I started my own cosmetic line, my hair line, and it's all empirically driven. But again, that's me being creative, right? I'm not in this space that I need someone to approve it. I'm growing the plants, drying it, extracting it, making the oils. So I think in the end, each one of us will find our comfort zone in terms of what are the activities that we enjoy doing, what are the kind of companies we like to keep in terms of peer group, and how do we want to live our life. I want a lot of quiet time in the weekend, just to dream, think, reflect. For many others, they just want to socialize during the weekend. For me, it's the opposite, because all week, that's all I'm doing. So I think it takes us a while to accept who we are. Before, I would be guilty. Why am I not wanting to socialize? Look at everyone else. Because people make you feel that way. Now I'm very comfortable saying, you know what? I want to just be home. But it takes time. We are not electric bulbs, right? That we switch on or switch off. And you talking about observing, right? We may be staring at the same thing for 10 years, but we may observe only after many years. I always think about that for myself, saying, gosh, I'm now observing it, but it was there all along.
Yeah. When you bring up the accessing the childlike nature in you, it reminded me of something I read in a book called Mastery by Robert Greene. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
It's funny because I think a lot of our discussion today is a reflection of a lot of the concepts he's talked about in that book. And it's one of my favorite books. I think it's so amazing. He basically takes, I think, 50 or so masters of history, which he defines as anyone who has really like mastered their craft, whether it be Albert Einstein with physics, or it might be Leonardo da Vinci or the Wright brothers. These people,
So I'm a big fan of Leonardo da Vinci and Ben Franklin. Like
yeah.
I always
They're
said,
both mentioned in there.
I want my life to be like theirs because they were artists, they
Exactly,
were
yeah.
engineers,
That's what
they
he
were
aimed for.
everything. So as a child, I would always read and say, I want to be just like them.
Amazing, yeah. He breaks down that he looks at their life stories and tries to formulate a pathway for you to become successful and master your own craft. And the whole first half of the book is talking about accessing the childlike curiosity that's within you. And they bring up the stories of how all these masters of history, they didn't really just follow some path that was given to them. It was all about accessing some strange curiosity or joy or vision they saw as a child that they just kind of did for fun. Like, I don't know, you've read about Leonardo da Vinci, you probably
Right.
know, as a child he used to steal papers from his parents' office and go in the woods and like paint.
So that was me, growing up in camp, and even when, my grandmother's paddy fields, I would just wander, dream, think, but I was just so happy. I was very happy alone. Whereas, how conversation is, how I can talk. So people assume that I'm an absolute extrovert. I'm actually not. I'm a combination. I want my quiet moments, and I'm happiest when I'm just quiet and doing things. And, this innate curiosity, everyone has it, but we don't feed it enough.
And maybe the information overload helps us to lose access to it as well.
Yeah. And again, I stopped watching TV. I think I've stopped watching TV in the last 10, 15 years. I don't have the patience for it. And that allows me all this time to, I do the same. I read certain books. I read a lot of self-help books that helped me a lot.
Which ones
I went through, so I started many moons back, a bit before I started the school. I used to read Rich Kid, Poor Kid, But that was a great book because it, just reading his stuff. Then I love Robin Sharma. The man who sold his Ferrari. He talks about, monomaniacal emphasis. And I think reading, my husband would look at it and say, what are you reading? Yeah. Brendan Burchard. I like all their books because it allowed me to be self-disciplined. It allowed me to see how, like you read the same books, like Mastery, how do successful people do things? And how to shut out the noise in the data. Like people who may say anything, you're on your path. So, but it takes, I think we all have our zone. You are awfully young to already be there. I wasn't there at your age.
Well, I think it'll develop with time. Even though maybe in this moment I think I know exactly what it is, 10 years from now I'll look at it like this is completely different now. But I think the patterns I see in myself, reading that book really opened my eyes to look back at my childhood and see what were the patterns in myself that I hadn't looked at before. And there are two patterns that really emerge that I find really interesting. First of all, as a child, I just had a weird joy in creating games.
Oh wow!
When I was with my sister, I look back at I found notes documents from 10 years ago in Word documents of me designing rules of these games and this is how it's structured.
Oh my god! I have to send you this article. I subscribe to The Atlantic.
Yeah. And
there's this podcast that The Atlantic does. And it was about games. Early morning today at 5, that's what I was listening to. Yeah, so I have to share it with you because it might jog something in you.
Maybe, yeah. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, so I'll make you listen to those podcasts.
I think the joy of creating something that everyone can enjoy together translated into my joy for working on projects such as the nonprofit I was telling you about. I enjoy bringing people together and creating something. This podcast is another... It's like I'm playing a game right now. It's a fun thing, and I love growing it. And I think people who might have similar experiences as a child, they might going on enjoying more time of work related to entrepreneurship and building businesses, and maybe similar to maybe the joy you felt in creating the school and creating the the other business
Cosmetic
right
line,
now,
yeah.
the cosmetic line. And so that was the first pattern I saw in myself. And a second pattern that I kind of forgot about, but it always, whenever I see an old video from childhood, it always re-embarks energy in me that I find again, that as a child, I just loved video for some reason, like filming videos,
Yeah?
recording videos, and
Oh.
I honestly forgot about it. But sometime I found on my old YouTube channel from many years ago.
That is so nice.
I found a video that I edited with 3 of my friends. There's a full script, and we're doing this, and we're doing that, and I edited it together. And I forgot I created it. And I watched it, like, I couldn't believe that I created that. And then even in my sophomore year, I remember I took a mobile video editing class that you basically just make films on your phone and edit it together and learn different skills and do different projects. And as soon as I took that class, it just re-embarked that same energy in me that I felt as a child. And then now again, I'm back to making videos again.
So you might be one of the biggest visual storytellers. And think about it. So I always say that, and I don't know if you remember, but I always said the world belongs to the best storyteller. That's what Walt Disney did. I mean, I'm in awe of Walt Disney. Whenever I go to any of that, like, I think, I would love to create this. So my husband jokes, he always jokes with me, he says, only 2 ideas per day. Because every day I'm like, I need to do this, I need to do that. There are times when I want to be a landscape designer. I want to, because I'm amazed at these golf courses. What brilliance, right? The way they organize the pitch,
I
etc.
just started playing golf 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
First time.
That's super cool. I don't like this sport. But I just think it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I also like what you said, which is each of us doesn't have to be like the other. We are innately creative differently. And there's enough room for all of us. And the beauty of life is to look at someone who's doing something and think, wow, my brain never went there. But you appreciate that your brain went there so that we could enjoy it.
Yeah, and it helps what you mentioned before, like spending more time to just be reflective and bored. Like quitting TV is a big one, right? That you're spending less, maybe before you used to watch a lot more, maybe 10, 15 years ago, but I think that time that frees up, you're able to just be naturally more reflective. And
100%.
I see that in myself as well. Like I stopped watching like TV and stuff like 3 years ago, and I've deleted all social media. And I waste like very limited time compared to when I look at my past self 4 years ago, just like scrolling on my phone all day. And
Also, social media is for validation. But then, actually, I was sitting and thinking of what I'm going to say at graduation. And I was just taking snippets here and there and reflecting on it. And one of the things was, what does social media really do to people? It shows you what others are doing. So you forget who you are. Secondly, you start desiring things that maybe you would never have desired before. And 3, as you said, you could be creating your own mojo in that time that you're watching somebody else's life. So, but again, everybody has to reach there, right?
Yeah, you can't teach it to someone.
No, you cannot. We have to feel it intrinsically.
Yeah, it's hard to get there. I made a separate video on my channel for like an hour long about, I broke down like 9 different reasons why I think quitting social media was like the biggest improvement I made to my life, and talk about the same things. It just puts so many desires in your head that weren't there before, and it activates. I think the way it's designed is to hijack that reward system in your brain that we evolved about. We feel better when we're accepted by the tribe, and it just takes that, puts it on steroids. Like you're just constantly thinking about it all
and
day.
And then before you know, you've given your life to something else, to someone else. You are not in control of your life.
And I think when I quit and whenever I go back, like once in a while, maybe I watch a basketball game with my friends, or I end up watching something, I always get a feeling in my mind that I feel like instead of me sitting here watching it, I should be doing it myself.
No, this is the problem though. I go through the same thing. Like I think once we detox ourselves from that, when we do that, we don't have the span of attention to focus on that. We're like, shouldn't we be doing something else? So I'm glad that you said that too. I go through that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's always like healthy to not be so ruled by our mind that, you always have to be working as well. Sometimes I sit down, I try to do it guilt-free once in a while. Just like make sure I'm like in check. I'm not like totally ruled by my mind and everything. But it's a balance though, because it's definitely a lot more of an exhilarating lifestyle when you're
100%.
away from that.
And it's liberating more than exhilarating that you actually took control of your life.
Oh yeah, it's a great feeling. I think one of the things we all crave is power. And when you have power over your own self, I think that is an amazing feeling.
So see, you said a very important thing. Power. Like, for me, I don't want power over other people. but I want power for my own life. I think that's very important. And if you really look at people, like I see a lot of the people I know, they get very carried away by their positions in companies. And at a very young age, I realized one thing. If you derive your source of power through the place of work or by association, then you should also recognize that the minute you leave that place, you have not built any self-identity.
You don't outsource it.
So from very young, I had that conviction in me saying, I just want to lead a free life and do what I want to do. But I have no desire to be in power or politics. And again, that's the other thing. You mentioned something about individualism, right? Sometimes I worry about the two aspects. When we are very individualistic, we are not ready to compromise either. And I feel life, I'm not saying we should compromise our principles or morals, but there is no black and white, right or wrong. And when we are all part of a society, we all have to barter all the time. We are always negotiating. And sometimes when we are very individualistic, we're not able to see multiple perspectives. We only see one perspective. Right?
Yeah, that's interesting. How do you strike that balance? It must be difficult.
I think, again, it's evolution. It is being humbling. You have to be humbled to realize you don't control every decision. And there's strength in numbers. If you have people who believe that you are, you can work with other people, that you are going to objectively analyze what is the best solution, then people are willing to work with you. And I have learned that a lot now. So I now am part of a couple of nonprofits. I never understood that side of the business. Now that I'm in it, I am so humbled because I feel it's harder to run a nonprofit than a for-profit, because nonprofit is all about going and finding people who will support your mission. And for that, you need to really work twice as hard. And you also need to give a little to get a little. So there's lots more play in that than starting your own school. So for me, that's this journey. Like I feel like by next 20 years, I am going to learn more about, how does one operate with a larger footprint?
Yeah.
And it is through a nonprofit. And then I'm also very excited about this nutraceuticals and cosmetics.
Yeah.
I'm really upset with the pharmaceutical world, and I truly believe day by day, I find doctors do not understand how the whole body works. You go to a GI, they only know the GI part. You go to a ENT, they only know that. But our body exists as a full system. It's not like, they're not severed. So the whole field has to change, where they have a systems approach to treating us. Otherwise, all they're doing is making us pop pills, which actually aggravate our body.
Yeah, I mean, I've not read much about the pharmaceutical side of it, but I've read a lot about the food industry part of it.
Correct.
Which I think is a whole other story.
Yeah. So I think it's along the same line. So that's why I started growing hibiscus. I started reading so much about ancient ways of treating. So Ayurveda, I have so many books now, and that's how I came up with all my hair oils, etc. And now, thanks to the Western instrumentation techniques like mass spectrometry, we can get evidence to see that actually there is this phytochemical that's actually benefiting whatever your body requires. So I think we are in a very interesting phase of science.
Yeah, it's amazing. When I was thinking back to the balance between individualism and also trying to gain other people's perspectives, something that came in my mind was that we don't have to change our individual beliefs to open our eyes to new beliefs either.
Correct.
When I think about the podcast, I spend some time in my free time when I'm bored. I think about what can I be doing better to improve the podcast, and the same skills that I read about keep coming back. And number one skill is listening. Number two skill is storytelling, because you're talking about before. And there's all these skills that come up, and excuse me. When I think about listening is, I think a lot of people think that to make a good podcast, you need to be a smart person and you need to know a lot, but so much of it comes down is to making the other person shine, and when you let them speak, you will sound more smarter.
Bingo.
But
and also being astute. You're listening, you're observing, and you also have a pulse of what like how that information can benefit somebody else. Imagine, so that's multiple perspectives while you're actually coming up with the questions.
wow, yeah. I haven't even thought about it like that. Like there's my perspective, your perspective, and then
Yeah.
everyone else's.
And your questions dictate how you are going to elicit the responses from me such that you accomplish what you set out to accomplish, which is benefit the larger
Yeah,
population.
and I've tried doing podcasts before, and I've even been on other podcasts where it's very question oriented, where they make the list of questions when they go in, and I find whenever I do that, it's terrible, because you're not really.
It's formulaic,
Yeah,
right?
and you're always thinking about the next question you're gonna ask, and you're not really listening to what the person's saying, and it feels like a bunch of boxes together instead of like a flowing conversation. So I've really been trying to balance. I really enjoy the natural flow conversations when I go in with no preparation and just talk and try to use my listening to guide it in a certain direction, in a certain theme, and I found that's been a lot more fun. Obviously, it's a little bit more challenging, but I think listening as a skill is very difficult. But connecting it back to what you said before, if you're able to be individualistic in your beliefs and certain in your beliefs and strong in those, and without the nagging, like without falling to the nagginess of conformity, and you're also able to listen very clearly and listen from their perspective is another big one, instead of just listening it through your lens, then you'll be able to understand why they see it in that way and also see it in your own way.
Correct.
Which is very hard. I'm saying that as if I know how to do it, and I don't
No,
myself.
none of us know. And I think, I also think, Shoria, there are some things we feel very strongly about. There are some things we are ambivalent about. So the things that we strongly feel, I think we are less ready to compromise on those. And that's also normal and human. There are things that we are ambivalent about. Those I think we listen more, we observe more, we think more. And it evolves with time.
Yeah, and I don't think the goal of life should just be to have the same beliefs you had for 10, 20 years.
Right.
I want to be able to challenge my own beliefs over time and see that development as well.
And I say something, and I've discovered that, and I say this to Roshan and all the kids here too. I say, today, the way life is, you should consider yourself as having more than one career path or more than one passion, and you need to pursue them all, because all this career, etc., is all really a capitalistic viewpoint. It is to let the labor market work, to let the industry work. But if you look at it from a humanistic perspective, before we lived such a structured world, people had multiple interests. And they did it for the joy of it. So I admire, right? So I want you to listen to that game podcast. They were talking about this German game designer. He's supposed to be a genius, the best game designer.
These
board games.
Are these like
board games.
Okay.
So he takes themes like communism versus capitalism, and you're playing this board game. And somewhere at that time, you have the role of being the government policy maker. And I want to get that game because I was like, oh, this sounds so exciting. So while you're playing that game, you realize, okay, ideologically you're a capitalist and they're communists. But in order for everybody to benefit, you need to actually negotiate and work with each other. So you need to kind of accept some of theirs, let go some of theirs. And I was listening to this and thinking, I want to get this game and see if any of the students here will enjoy it in middle school in the history, while we're doing history, saying, so we're actually role playing this. It's a wonderful podcast. Early morning I was listening and I said, and again, it's humbling. I was like, I don't even know how to design these games. Like my brain.
But everyone has their own skill, right?
It is, but it's also like what you said. Nobody fostered it in me. I was like, in some ways, we are all taught to have goals. So designing a game and all that, does it fit into that goal? It doesn't necessarily,
yeah,
right?
That's true.
So I was sitting and listening and saying, wow, that's a skill.
Amazing. Do you always get up early at 5?
Lately I have. But I have my best. So I write best early in the morning. So I have this app, the Trello. I love it. It allows me to quickly write whatever I remember so that, I don't forget it later when I have to memorialize it. So all these have become habits.
Are these just ideas in general?
They're ideas, they're work. So I have it by year, I have them by projects. You should keep, if you don't have it, you'll love it.
I've heard about it. I've never tried using it.
Yeah, I actually had Nitara use it.
Oh, really?
Like for a Future City, I made all the kids. We had a group Trello.
You
will do it in college.
Yeah.
So it's like this. There are different boards.
Yeah.
And under 2024,
I guess columns.
I have columns for like by month, by everything. Oh my God, it's 5:11. We have to go.
Oh,
it's the party.
Oh yeah, Nitara's a dance, right?
Nitara's dance.
More for like an hour and a half. Can we close it there then?
Yeah, we'll close, but then I would love to chat with you later.
I'm here all summer, so we can always run it.
Let's do that.
Sounds good. Thank you, Ms. Nan.
Anytime. All right.
If you enjoyed that episode, then you're going to love this episode right here. Make sure you click here to watch that video, and don't forget to like and subscribe.